On April 18, 1943, 16 American P-38 Lightnings took off from Guadalcanal on a mission so secret that only a handful of people knew it existed. Their target wasn't a city, wasn't a bridge, wasn't a convoy. Their target was a single man. Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was scheduled to fly an inspection tour over the Solomon Islands that morning. American codebreakers had intercepted his exact flight plan down to the minute, and someone at the highest levels of the United States government made a decision: kill him. The P-38s flew 435 miles at wave-top height to avoid radar detection. They had an 18-minute window to intercept. And what happened next would go down as one of the most extraordinary targeted assassination missions in military history. But here's the part most people never talk about. The P-38 Lightning, the plane that pulled off that mission, was nearly canceled before it ever reached combat. And the story of why it survived and what it went on to do is one of the most remarkable to understand why the P-38 mattered. You have to go back to 1937. The world was nervous. Germany was rearming. Japan was expanding into China. And the United States Army Air Corps quietly issued a specification for something they called a high-altitude pursuit interceptor. They wanted a plane that could climb fast, fly far, and hit hard. Something unlike anything flying at the time. Lockheed, at that point a relatively modest California aircraft manufacturer, took the challenge seriously. Their chief engineer, Hall Hibbard, and a young designer named Clarence Kelly Johnson sat down and started sketching something genuinely radical. What they came up with looked like nothing else in the sky. Twin booms, twin engines, twin tails. A central nacelle housing the pilot and the armament. It was strange-looking, almost futuristic. The Germans would eventually call it Der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. That nickname alone tells you something about the impression it made. But between the drawing board and the battlefield, there was a long and brutal road. And the P-38 nearly didn't survive it. The XP-38 prototype first flew on January 27, 1939, piloted by Lieutenant Benjamin Kelsey. The flight itself went well enough, but on its second flight, a transcontinental speed dash meant to generate publicity. The plane crashed on approach to Mitchell Field in New York after the throttle settings caused carburetor icing that killed both engines. Kelsey walked away. The prototype didn't. The Army still placed an order. They could see what the aircraft was capable of, even through the wreckage. Early production models had serious problems. The cockpit heated unevenly, pilots in the Pacific roasted while pilots over Europe froze. At high-speed dives, compressibility effects caused the aircraft to buffet violently and the controls to lock up. Several pilots died in testing when they couldn't pull out of dives. It took Lockheed engineers considerable time to develop dive recovery flaps that solved the problem. These weren't minor inconveniences. They were life-and-death engineering challenges being solved in real time while a war was already being fought. And yet, despite all of it, the P-38 went to war. And it performed in ways that genuinely shocked people on both sides. The twin-engine configuration was the key to everything. Every other single-seat fighter of the era ran on one engine. One engine meant one point of failure. One engine meant limited range. The P-38 had two Allison V1710 liquid-cooled engines, counter-rotating, which eliminated the propeller torque that made so many other fighters difficult to handle at low speeds. Lose one engine over the Pacific, you still had a fighting chance of making it home. That was not a small thing when your alternatives included hundreds of miles of open ocean beneath you. The armament was equally unusual. Instead of wing-mounted guns spread across a wide span, which created convergence problems at different ranges, the P-38 packed everything into the nose. One 20mm Hispano cannon and four 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, all firing in a tight, concentrated cluster. The firepower was devastating and accurate at longer ranges than most fighters could manage. In the Pacific, the P-38 found its natural home. The distances involved in Pacific operations were staggering, and the P-38's range, over 1,000 miles with drop tanks, made it the only American fighter capable of escorting bombers deep into Japanese-held territory. By 1942 and into 1943, as the brutal campaign for the Solomon Islands ground on, P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron and other units were tangling with Japanese A6M Zero fighters regularly over the jungle and water. The Zero was a terrifying opponent. Lighter, more maneuverable, with exceptional range of its own. American pilots had learned the hard way early in the war. You do not fight a Zero, you will lose. The P-38 gave them a different option. Its speed, its climbing ability, its firepower. These rewarded a different style of fighting. Boom and zoom tactics. Hit hard, hit fast. Use your superior speed to disengage before the Zero pilot could bring his nose around. It was a discipline that took learning, but pilots who mastered it became legends. Major Richard Bong of Wisconsin became the highest-scoring American ace of the entire war, flying P-38s exclusively. By the war's end, he had 40 confirmed aerial victories, all in the Pacific, almost all in P-38s. General Douglas MacArthur personally pinned the Medal of Honor on Bong in December 1944. Right on a New Guinea airstrip. The man was 24 years old. Thomas Maguire, also flying P-38s, reached 38 kills before he died in January 1945, attempting a low-altitude turning fight with a Zero over the Philippines in a maneuver that violated every lesson the war had taught. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor as well. These weren't isolated cases. The P-38 produced more aces in the Pacific than any other American fighter. But back to that April morning in 1943 and Admiral Yamamoto. The mission, codenamed Operation Vengeance, was planned down to extraordinary precision. Captain John Mitchell led the 16 P-38s of the 339th Fighter Squadron from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. They flew the entire approach at 50 feet above the water to avoid detection, maintaining strict radio silence. The timing had to be perfect. Yamamoto was famously punctual. His two Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, escorted by 6 Zero fighters, were expected over Bougainville at exactly 9:35 a.m. At 9:34 a.m., the P-38s arrived. Lieutenant Rex Barber made the first firing pass on Yamamoto's transport. Lieutenant Thomas Lanphier, Jr. engaged to Zero escorts. What happened in the next few minutes has been debated by historians for decades. Both Barber and Lanphier claimed the kill, and the argument was never fully resolved. What is not disputed is the outcome. Yamamoto's aircraft went down into the jungle above Bougainville. Japanese search parties found the wreckage the next day. Yamamoto was dead, still strapped into his seat, thrown clear of the burning aircraft. The man who planned Pearl Harbor was killed by the same nation he had attacked, in a mission that would have been impossible without the range and performance of the P-38 Lightning. In Europe, the P-38 had a more complicated story. Early operations over the continent revealed that the Allison engine struggled in the cold at high altitude. The turbo superchargers iced up. The cockpit heating remained inadequate. And German pilots flying the Focke-Wulf FW-19D and Messerschmitt Bf-109G quickly learned to exploit the P-38's compressibility issues in diving attacks. The 8th Air Force suffered painful losses with the aircraft in late 1943 and early 1944, and there were serious discussions about pulling it from the European theater entirely. But the Mediterranean was a different story. In the hands of pilots like Lieutenant Colonel Robin Olds, who would later become a legend in Vietnam, and the men of the 1st and 82nd Fighter Groups, the P-38 excelled at long-range escort and ground attack missions across North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. The aircraft's range made it invaluable in ways the shorter-leg Spitfire and early P-47 Thunderbolt simply couldn't match. And there is one extraordinary European moment that almost never gets mentioned. On August 1, 1943, during Operation Tidal Wave, the catastrophic low-level B-24 raid on the Plosti oil refineries in Romania, P-38s of the 82nd Fighter Group flew the longest-range fighter escort mission in European theater history to that point. The losses that day were devastating for the bomber crews, but the P-38 pilots fought with everything they had across hundreds of miles of hostile sky. The fork-tailed devil kept showing up, in places it had no right to reach. In fights, it had no guarantee of winning. If you enjoy real, untold war stories like this, make sure you're subscribed because this is just one of many forgotten missions from World War II.